This is a day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. I always wait to see if the microphone has been turned on before I finish. It is good to have everyone here today. It is a pleasure to have our visitors. We welcome you and hope you'll stick around and let's get to meet you. Today we will be reading the exciting conclusion of our 4-week study of Samson, the strongest man in the world. His ending is found in Judges 16, so turn there in your Bibles if you want to follow along this morning. Of course, the study of Samson is found in Judges 13, 14, and 15, and 16. We're going to read about what God has planned for Samson. Judges 16. Pulled them up, bar and all, put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. Okay, do we have an issue here with this story? Are we missing the sentence about God swooping down mightily and giving Samson the strength that he needs to rip these two gates, the doors, whatever we call them, their posts, the bars, and putting them on his shoulders and carrying them up the hill? Again, does Samson have his strength all the time because he has his long hair? Or is that sentence missing that God came upon him mightily to give him the strength to be able to rip these two gates up? And going into a city, it's not going to be small gates. It's not like we would think maybe a gate going into the garden or a gate going to our yard. These are going to be big wood, heavy gates, I assume, to protect the city with the post and what are called the bar and all. Everything. Okay? Puts them on his shoulders and walks away with them. Or does Samson have the superhuman strength all the time, but God again supersizes him when he's needed it to fight the Philistines? Does Samson's normal super strength lie in his long hair, and God gives him more strength when he needs it to kill the Philistines or to escape the Philistines? Let's continue reading in verses 4 and 5. Afterward, it happened that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came to her and said to her, "Entice him and find out where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and every one of us, each of the lords, will give you 1,100 pieces of silver." The Philistines are still after Samson, of course. They know they will not be able to overpower him, so they need to take his power away. Another unanswered question is, how do they know that his great strength can be overpowered or removed so that they can capture him? Notice that knows Samson has a weakness with women, that Samson will give in to their crying and nagging. So these Philistine lords are willing to pay Delilah 1,100 pieces of silver each to get this important information out of him. Imagine how their standings will increase in the Philistines if they can find this secret code and crack it and neutralize this great and powerful Samson without losing another Philistine in the process. Verses 6 and 7. So Delilah said to Samson, now Delilah sees an easy, hefty payday for her if she can get Samson to open up to her. So she starts to pour on her feminine charm to get the answers to Samson's great strength. Please tell me where your great strength lies. I can just see her pouring it on heavy. And with what you may be bound with will afflict you. And Samson said to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not yet dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. Did Samson cave in with the first volley of Samson's charm? Let's read on. Verses 8 and 9. So the lords of the Philistines brought up her 7 fresh bowstrings that were not yet dried, and she bound him with them. Now men were laying in wait, staying with her in the room. And she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he broke the bowstrings, and a strand of yarn brake when he touched his fire. So the secret to his strength was not known. Now is Samson playing a game with her, and he is awake when she is tying him up? Or is he really that heavy of a sleeper? Again, the scriptures leave information to our minds to ponder. But Samson didn't give her the answer to his strength on the first try. I think again that this is maybe a game for him, that he is playing with her and the Philistines. Moving on to verses 10 through 13. I'm sure Delilah has seen all that silver starting to slip from her fingers. She regroups and again goes after Samson. Verse 10. Then Delilah said to Samson, look, you have mocked me, told me lies. Now please tell me what ye may be bound with. So he said to her, if they bind me. Notice that Delilah is stuck on the idea that Samson can be bound with some physical object like rope and be rendered powerless. Kind of like wrapping Superman with krypton-infused ropes. Okay? But notice what Samson says, if they bind me. Wait a minute. Samson knows that they are there. So is this a game for him? Who knew that Samson could be a jokester in all of this? Because I see it, that's what he's doing. He knows they're in the room. They know they're going to bind him. He knows they want to take his strength away from him. So he's playing with them. He's antagonizing them. He's making Delilah mad especially because she's starting to see this money, all these silver coins that she's supposed to be getting, slipping through her fingers. If they bind me securely with new ropes that have never been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. Therefore, Delilah took the new ropes and bound him with them. Notice, Samson wasn't asleep at this time. And said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And men were laying in wait, staying in the room. But he broke them off his arms like a thread. I wonder if Samson runs at them, and antagonizes them or whatever, because he knows they're still in the room. He knows what's happening, but he's given all this false information of using new ropes or whatever that he knows he's going to be able to break. Again, I see it as being some kind of a joke. Verses 13 through 14. Delilah said to Samson, until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me what you may be bound with. Does anybody else hear the anger in Delilah's voice by now? I think she was very stern and solemn, and her hands were on her hips when she told Samson, "Until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me what you may be bound with." Again, she thinks that there's some special rope or whatever that he can be bound with, and he would lose his strength and they would be able to take him without being harmed. Continuing on, and he said to her, "If you weave the 7 locks of my head into the web of the loom." So she wove it tightly with the batten of the loom and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he awoke from his sleep, pulled out the batten and the web from the loom. It seems Samson is like others who fall asleep, and if you play with her hair, they fall asleep. I know my daughter, my wife is like that. If you start playing with her hair and combing or whatever, she goes out. Maybe that's what happened with Samson here. Or he's just tired of all this. But he goes to sleep. I don't know exactly what the process is or how long it would take, but Samson dozes off to sleep and is startled awake by Delilah again yelling at him. This time, I'm sure she's angry. That the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he awoke, pulled out the batten from the web of his hair in the loom, and I'm sure the laughter has left the room, and you could hear a pin or a batten hit the floor. What do you think? Again, he's playing with them, and I'm sure they're not laughing at it. Verses 15 through 17. Now Delilah is really starting to see this money slip away, all these silver coins, because he keeps playing with them and is not giving him the truth. She has got to get on her A game and really pour on her feminine charm on Samson to get the truth this time about where his strength lies and how to subdue him. In verse 15, then she said to him, "How can you say, 'I love you,' when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies." And it came to pass, when she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him, so that his soul was vexed to death. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read this story, I always thought this was occurring in one night, that all these events were happening in one night. And it might have been the first couple were. But we see here that she pestered him daily for the truth. We don't know how many days she pestered him, but it was to the point that it vexed his soul to death. He was tired of her constant nagging, her constant getting after him. You don't love me anymore. You say you love me, but you don't because you won't tell me the truth. Just over and over and over. What is it going to take to take your strength away? What can we tie you up with? Just over and over all day long for days. Again, we don't know how long. But it wasn't just one night like I've always thought. It was for days. Again, we don't know exactly what all is happening here, but we do know that she is starting to wear him down. I looked at a couple of commentaries about this vexing, how he was vexed his soul to death. And one of them stated, let me get here. This person stated that the writer tells us, I'm sorry, wrong place. Let me get on the right page here. A commentary stated that it came to pass that when she pressed him daily with her words and urged him to lay at him day after day to communicate his secret to her, she gave him no rest, but was incessant in her applications to him, so his soul was vexed unto death. Could hardly bear to live, but wished to die, being in the utmost perplexity what to do between 2 different passions, love for her and fear of God. And on one hand, chained by the lust to this woman that was continually teasing him, and whom he had not the heart to leave, or otherwise that would have cleared him of his difficulties. And on the other hand, should he disclose the secret to his strength, he feared and was in danger of losing his strength, in which his glory lay. If this was a game to Samson, he had managed to joke himself into a dangerous corner. Continuing on with verse 17. Then he told her, for I have been a Nazarite to God. Let me back up again, I'm sorry. For he told her all his heart and said to her, no razor has come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. Does Samson also believe that his strength is found in his hair? Or is he continuing with his joking, with his lies to her, knowing that that's not the truth? Verse 18. When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, come up once more, for he has told me all his heart. So the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hands. Delilah thinks that Samson has finally caved in to all of her demands and nagging, and has told her the truth of where his great strength lies. She was convincing enough to the Philistine lords that they brought all this money, 1,100 pieces of silver apiece, to give it to her for this truth. Verse 19. Then she lulled him to sleep on her knees and called for a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Again, she thinks she's got him. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. Samson's strength is finally gone. He is like any other man, no strong arms. He's not killing anybody. He is weak and abandoned. Abandoned. Why do I say abandoned? Let's continue on to verse 20. And she said to the Philistines, she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. So he awoke from his sleep and said, I will go out as before at other times and shake myself free. Samson realizes that his strength is not in his hair. He thinks he has again lied to her, and that he's going to be able to go out there like he's done all these other times and scare these Philistines off. He knows his strength is from God. But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. The Lord had departed from Samson. So it's not from his hair like everybody always thinks, and people talk about it, and you watch videos on sermons on Samson. They all say that his strength was in his hair. You read stories about it, and they all say his strength was in his hair. But it wasn't. It was from God. And we see here that yes, Delilah cut his hair, but it was the fact that God had left him. There is the key to Samson's strength. The Lord gives it to him, and the Lord takes it away. Why now? Why did God abandon Samson now? Was this all a part of God's plan? We don't know. All we know is that God departed from Samson. I mentioned in the first 2 lessons in chapters 13 and 14 of Judges that Samson might have broken his Nazirite vow when he killed the lion. Number 6 only states that he could not be around a dead body, and I thought a dead lion filled that bill, or did it? Numbers chapter 6 states that he would not be able to go to any funeral, not even any of his close family members, because the Nazirite vow, he could not be around a dead body. And the third part of the Nazirite vow was that he could not have anything to do with grapes, from the seed to the skin. He could not drink wine. He could not drink grape juice. He could not drink vinegar that had wine in it or grape juice in it. He could not eat a grape. He could not eat raisins, dried grapes. Nothing to do with grapes. And then the third part was he could not shave his head ever. And I'd say, well, maybe when Samson had his wedding feast, the 7-day wedding feast, that he more than likely drank wine. But the scriptures do not state that. And I say whenever he walked through the vineyard to go see his first wife, to meet her, he walked through a vineyard, and how tempting it would be to just pick a grape here and there. But again, the scriptures do not state that. The scriptures do not state that Samson broke his Nazirite vow ever. But the third part of cutting his hair, we see that. So maybe this is the first time that Samson has broken his Nazirite vow. He has given in to the nagging of Delilah and had his hair cut. And again, his strength did not lie in his hair, but maybe it's the fact that he finally did break his Nazirite vow, his lifelong Nazirite vow, that he did not have an option of leaving. He was born into it because God had a purpose for Samson. And so because he broke that Nazirite vow, because he was not in the service of God anymore, God left him. And when God left him, he took his strength with him, and he was a normal man. So Delilah calls in the Philistines who want him dead. And let's read on in verse 21. Then the Philistines took Samson and put out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza. They bound him with bronze fetters, and he became a grinder in the prison. I should have gotten a picture of the bronze fetters, but what they are is just handcuffs, more or less, that are made out of bronze. The ones I saw, they were just solid metal with a loop around the wrist. And they could also do them on the feet if they wanted to where you couldn't run. But that's what the fetters are. We would call them handcuffs today. And they brought him down into the prison, and he was a grinder. And that, from what I can see, is he's taking the place of a donkey or an oxen. You've seen it to where they've got the two big wheels, and they have arms on them, and they push them. Usually 2 or 4 arms. There might be a donkey or an ox, or sometimes 4 people. And that's what they do, is just turning that grinding wheel to grind the wheat into flour. And so that's what Samson is doing in his prison with his strength and all. He's just doing this, pushing this around, grinding that. And then in verse 22, however, the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaven. They are allowing his hair to grow back. With each inch, he is getting closer to his Nazirite vow. And again, as we stated earlier, we don't know at what length his hair had to be in compliant with the Nazirite vow. If it was 6 inches, 12 inches, we don't know. But it was never to be cut. So here he is in prison, and his hair is starting to grow back. So he is starting back into that Nazirite vow with his hair growing longer. And then in verse 23, now the lords of the Philistines gathered together to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to rejoice. And they said, our God has finally delivered into our hands Samson, our enemy. And of course we know that Dagon doesn't exist, and he didn't deliver anybody into their hands. But God himself, by turning his back on Samson, he was delivered to them. In verse 24, when the people saw him, when they saw Samson, they praised their God, for they said, our God has delivered into our hands our enemy, the destroyer of our land, and the one who multiplied our dead. We see here how the devastation that Samson has brought down on the Philistine nation. We read last week how he decimated their land with the 150 pairs of foxes with the flaming torches tied between their tail. And they released them into the wheat fields that were ready for the harvest. And we have read the thousands of Philistines that he has killed, not to mention however many that might have been killed during the fires. Verse 25. So it happened when their hearts were merry that they said, call for Samson, that he may perform for us. So they called for Samson from the prison, and he performed for them. Now, I don't know what kind of performance that Samson gave for them. Since he is weak, he's still just a human, so he's not doing any kinds of great acts of strength, I would think. I don't know. But he does some kind of performance for them to please the crowd. Continuing our reading. And they stationed him between the pillars. Then Samson said to the lad who held him by the hand, let me feel the pillars which support the temple, that I can lean on them. Now the temple was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there, and about 3,000 men and women were on the roof, watching while Samson performed. This had to be a huge hall if 3,000 people are on the roof watching. I'm assuming they had an open part of it, but they're watching Samson perform. 3,000 men and women up on the roof. They're watching Samson, this killer of the Philistines. Now look at him, blind, having to be led around by a young boy so he doesn't trip and fall. But Samson isn't sleeping. Samson isn't enjoying the festivities. Samson isn't letting them get away with what they have done to him. Samson is thinking of a way to get even one more time, and a way to help God free his people from these uncircumcised Philistines. Verse 28, then Samson called to the Lord, saying, O Lord God, remember me. I pray, strengthen me. Give me my strength, Lord. Give me the power that I need. One more time. I pray just this once, O God, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Let me take vengeance on them for blinding me. Verse 29, and Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars which supported the temple, and he braced himself against them, one on his right and one on the other on his left. Samson grabs the 2 middle pillars that are probably the main supports for the whole building. Samson wants to bring the building down on the Philistines and seek revenge for being blind. And then verse 30, and Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And he pushed with all of his might. And the temple fell on the lords and all the people who were in it, and including those who were 3,000 that were up on the roof. So the dead that he killed at his death was more than he had killed during his whole lifetime. Not only the 3,000 spectators up on the roof died, but all of the lords of the Philistines. In his final act of super strength, which these scriptures don't state, but I can assume that without hesitation that God answered Samson's prayer and gave him his strength back. Because of this final act and what it's going to do. And in so doing, Samson killed more at his death than he did while he was alive. God had a plan for Samson before he was born, and that was to begin to deliver the children of Israel out of the hands of the Philistines. Remember, verse 1 of our reading in chapter 13. The children of Israel had done wrong. They had sinned against God. And because of that, sinning again and turning their backs on God again, God put them under the Philistines for 40 years. God had a plan for Samson before he was born to deliver them, the children of Israel, out of the hands of the Philistines. I think Samson completed that mission successfully. He managed to kill thousands of Philistines during his lifetime. He put them into what I would call a famine when he burned down their wheat fields and their vineyards and their olive groves. Again, the scriptures don't state that, but that is a huge devastation. So they were probably in a famine. That is why, again, Samson was born into the Nazirite vow, that he had to dedicate his life to God in order to complete one task, to begin to deliver the children of Israel out of the hands of the chaos of the Philistines. Whether Samson accomplished that by reducing their numbers, by causing chaos in their government, by killing all the lords, or by starving them, or just making the Philistines hate the Israelites enough to get rid of them. We don't know. The scriptures do not say. But again, I'm going to assume that Samson completed God's mission during his lifetime. So all of these things added up was what God wanted to start that process of the children of Israel coming out from underneath the rule of the Philistines. Which brings us back to Hebrews 11 one more time. I want to look at these verses describing how the men and women listed in the faith chapter had great faith, and how I have applied this to the life of Samson. We have already applied the fated statements to Samson. Yes, I might have stretched the meaning of a couple in order to apply them to Samson, but I think they all could apply to him. The last statement is that Samson obtained promises. Taking the Nazirite vow meant that the person could not eat or touch anything made from a grape, from the seed to the skin. They could not drink anything made from grape juice, wine, or vinegar. They could not eat the grapes or anything made with grapes. The second part of the vow was that the person under the vow could not be close to a dead body. That included any member of their family. And the last part that we read about this morning was the downfall of Samson, was the person under the Nazirite vow could not cut their hair. The Nazirite vow meant that the person who took the vow was to dedicate their life for a set amount of time to the service of God. We read in Judges 13 that Samson was born into this vow. He didn't have a choice to take the Nazirite vow. His whole life, from his miraculous birth to his violent death, was to be in service of God, which was to begin to deliver the children of Israel out of the hands of the Philistines and to return them back to God. I think that was an unwritten promise from God to Samson. God promised Samson that he would be with him and watch over him as long as Samson maintained his Nazirite vow. That is why God left Samson after he told Delilah to cut his hair. Whether he thought that was the source of his strength or not, it broke his Nazirite vow to God. So God left him at that moment to deal with the consequences of his sin. The same is true for us today. We must face the consequences of our sins today, whatever they are. Our consequences might not be as violent as what befell Samson, having his eyes poked out. Maybe we never see or feel the consequences of our sin, but they are there. They are always there. There is an eternal consequence that none of us wants to face. Samson repented of his sin. He grew his hair back, and God kept his promise and returned to Samson for one last blow, a massive fatal blow to the Philistines. I want us to read Hebrews 11 verses 32 through 34 one more time to remind us of the things that Samson might have accomplished during his lifetime, and that got his name mentioned in this faith chapter. And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and of the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouth of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong,
became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. I highlighted flight because I kept saying fight, and so I highlighted it so I make sure I said it right this time. Closing out chapter 16 this morning, in the story of Samson we read in verse 31, and his brothers and all his father's household came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of his father Manoah. He had judged Israel for 20 years. We see here between the lines that Samson's father Manoah has died. I say that because he is not listed as one who came down for Samson's body, but his father's household. Plus the fact that Samson was buried in his father's tomb. So with that, I assume his father is dead, and that again, Samson would not have been able to attend his father's funeral because of his Nazirite vow, unless his father died while he was in prison, in which case he wouldn't have been able to attend it anyway. But that concludes our study of Samson. And I hope you have found this study interesting. Maybe you've learned something that you didn't know, saw something in a different light, maybe with Samson's hair. But I just hope that it has been an interesting study for you as it has been for me. Now, I will not be here next week. The men of the congregation encouraged me to attend at least some type of a retreat or seminar or anything once a year. And of course, last year I couldn't do that because of COVID. But things are starting to loosen up and everything. So Kathy and I are going to go down to a lectureship this coming weekend on proof there is a God. So I think that's going to be interesting. There's a lot of educated men who are going to be teaching the classes Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday morning. And so we're going to go down there and listen to them. A lot of guys with a lot of alphabets behind their names and in front of their names. Some of them are engineers. One of them is a NASA engineer, propulsion, I think it was, dealing with the satellite or dealing with the space station and things. So there's going to be a wide variety of people to listen to, giving proof that God does exist. And we might sit there and think about it, it's like, of course God exists. I know that. I realize that. But, do you have the proof that you could tell somebody else about it? To me, we will never have physical proof like the Ark of the Covenant. In my opinion, we will never, ever see the Ark of the Covenant. It will never, ever be found. Because then we have something substantial and we don't need faith. Because what is faith? The substance of things not seen, evidence of things not proven. I can't remember now what it is. But with the Ark of the Covenant, we wouldn't need faith, would we? Because we have something physical that we could see. So we had to come up with other ways of proof of God. And when you look at science proves there is a God. Things just can't happen the way it is. They try to say, well, evolution or the Big Bang or the single cell that climbed out of the gooey mud, and that's what formed life. They have no way of basing that or no facts. It's all just speculation to try to disprove creation. But when you look at creation, when you look at the magic of birth alone, from conception to birth and all in your life, it's a miracle. It's not something that just happens. So it's going to be interesting to listen to all these men. I think there's like a dozen men that are going to be presenting classes on this. So I look forward to bringing that information back to you and maybe a new series of sermons and giving you the proof on that there is a God, which, again, you know that and you believe that. Again, I hope you've found this study interesting and can apply it to your life. And you say, well, how can I apply the life of Samson, to my life? Look at the mistakes that Samson made. Look how he fell to sin over and over again. We sin. We're weak. We might not sin like Samson did, but we do sin. And that's why we have forgiveness. That's the reason we take this time to help our brothers and sisters, to come forward and let us pray for you. Let us encourage you. Let us help you. Let us give you the strength that you need. We started on a Wednesday night a new study on prayer, and that's what we're talking about. And we've discussed it even just, we've already had one class on how prayer affects us, how prayer helps us, how prayer gives us strength. And that's what we need when we sin. We need the prayers of our family to give us that strength to help us to overcome sin, to help us to be the Christian that we need to be. What did Samson do at his last final hour? God, please give me the strength. And that's what we need to pray for. God, give us the strength to overcome the sin in our life. Give me the strength to say no. Give me the strength to turn my back on the devil. Give me the strength to live the Christian life that I'm supposed to live. Or maybe you haven't put God on yet in baptism. And that's something that you realize that you need to do in your life. The baptistry is ready. I think it's interesting that every time I get to this point, that heater kicks on, to remind us it's ready. We can do away with your sin problem this morning and get you right with God. Just let your wishes be known as we stand and sing this morning.